She watched him snap his fingers at her like she was a dog. Park Min-jun didn't see a person standing before him. He saw decoration, furniture with a pulse. He thought that by speaking in a language she couldn't possibly know, he'd reduce her to nothing in front of his business partners. He thought his billions made him bulletproof. He was wrong. He didn't know that the woman holding his menu wasn't just a server. And the words about to leave her mouth would do more than silence the room. They would dismantle everything he'd built. This is how pride became its own executioner. If you're eager to know what transpired and how Lisa got into this situation, you might want to hang in a little longer. Would she conquer the intimidation, or would she let him demean her? There's only one way to find out. Please subscribe to the channel and share to others. Thank you. The dining room at Azure Sky, Seoul's most exclusive rooftop restaurant, carried the scent of imported wagyu, aged kimchi from 100-year-old ongi pots, and generational money. For Lisa Amati, it mostly smelled like survival. The kind of survival that came with a price tag she paid daily in dignity, exhaustion, and dreams deferred so long they'd started to fossilize in her chest. Lisa adjusted the tight collar of her uniform, the fabric cutting in her neck, because she'd gained weight from stress-eating ramen at 2 a.m., the only meal she could afford after rent. The digital clock behind the bar glowed, 9:23 p.m. on a Friday night. Dinner service had reached its peak. The soundtrack of wealth played around her. Crystal stemware meeting bone china. Laughter that cost more per breath than Lisa made in a week. Conversations conducted in that particular tone of voice that came from never having to check a bank balance before making a purchase. Table 12 needs their galbi reheated. Table 6 says the banchan is too cold. Move it, Amati. The voice belonged to Manager Choi, a woman who believed efficiency was next to godliness, and that hesitation was a terminal character flaw. She stood near the sommelier station, examining the wine inventory like it contained state secrets. Her perfectly manicured nails clicked against the tablet screen as she scrolled through reservation lists, her expression perpetually pinched with the stress of managing Seoul's elite. Yes, Manager Choi, Lisa replied, keeping her tone even, professional, the voice of someone who'd learned that emotion was a luxury she couldn't afford in this environment. She lifted a tray of soja bottles, their glass surfaces cool against her palms, pushing past the burning sensation radiating from her ankles to her spine. 14 hours on her feet. 14 hours of standing, walking, bowing, smiling, disappearing into the background while her body screamed for rest. Her shoes, fake leather from Dongdaemun Market purchased on a desperate Sunday morning 3 months ago, were disintegrating. The left heel had cracked enough to let water seep through every time she crossed the kitchen's constantly wet floors, leaving her sock damp and her foot blistering. She tried to repair them with superglue last week, but the adhesive had only held for 2 days before surrendering to the relentless pressure of her shifts. Lisa Amati was 29 years old. To the guests at Azure Sky, she was background noise. Ambiance, the hand that poured the macchiali, the voice that recited the chef's specials with the same inflection every time, like a recording played on loop. The body that absorbed their dismissiveness without reaction, their rudeness without response, their casual cruelty without consequence. They never noticed the thin scar across her knuckles from where she'd sliced her hand on broken glass last year, fainting from hunger during a double shift, her blood mixing with dishwater before anyone realized she'd fallen. They definitely didn't notice the way her left eye twitched when she was particularly exhausted, or the slight tremor in her hand by the end of the night, or the way she sometimes had to grip the edge of tables to steady herself when dizziness washed over her. They certainly didn't know that 3 years ago, Lisa had been a research fellow in African Asian linguistic studies at Seoul National University, one of 5 candidates worldwide selected for the prestigious Hangul Foundation Scholarship, a program so competitive that the acceptance rate hovered around 2%. Her focus was on the historical connections between West African tonal languages and Korean phonetic structures, research that had the potential to rewrite what scholars understood about linguistic evolution, migration patterns, and the hidden threads connecting human cultures across vast geographic distances. Until the call came at 3 a.m. Lagos time. The call that every child fears receiving. The call that changes everything in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Her mother's car accident. The spinal injury that left her unable to walk, unable to work, unable to do anything but lie in a hospital bed and wonder if she'd ever stand again. The medical costs that devoured Lisa's scholarship money first. Then her savings accumulated over years of careful budgeting and sacrifice. Then the fund her mother had quietly, secretly set aside for Lisa's future. Nigerian healthcare for the poor was a particular kind of purgatory, a system that demanded payment up front and offered hope on a sliding scale determined entirely by how much money you could produce. Physical therapy sessions, 500,000 Nigerian nairas each week. Medications to manage pain and prevent infections, 300,000 Nigerian nairas monthly. The private facility that actually provided care instead of neglect, 2 million Nigerian nairas monthly, an impossible sum that grew more impossible with each passing month. Her advisor had been sympathetic but firm. We can defer for 6 months, maybe a year if we push the administrative limits. But the fellowship has conditions, Lisa. Funding requirements. Timeline expectations. You understand? She understood. She understood that the academic world didn't stop spinning because your life fell apart. She understood that opportunities like the Hangul Foundation Fellowship didn't wait for personal tragedies to resolve themselves. She withdrew from the program, signed the papers, packed up her research materials, and said goodbye to Professor Kim with tears in her eyes and a stone in her chest. Now she lived in a Gazawan in Shinchun, one of those tiny rooms that Koreans called efficiency housing and that were really just glorified closets, a space barely large enough for a mattress and a small desk, where the walls were so thin she could hear her neighbors breathing at night, could hear every phone conversation, every moment of private life that should have been private. On her desk, wedged between textbooks she couldn't bear to sell and a laptop she used to send weekly updates to her mother, sat an envelope labeled Mama's Fund in her own handwriting, the letters carefully formed in the hopeful days when she'd first started saving. 847,000 Korean wons. The number she'd counted last night, spreading the bills and coins across her desk, organizing them by denomination, calculating how long it would last. Earned one indignity at a time, one shift at a time, one smile at a time. Barely enough for 2 weeks at the decent facility in Lekki where her mother might actually heal instead of just exist. She'd been a scholar once, a linguist who understood that language was power, that it shaped reality, that it carried history and identity and the accumulated wisdom of generations. Now she was invisible labor in a uniform that didn't fit properly, carrying other people's meals, swallowing their contempt with a smile that had stopped reaching her eyes months ago. She'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen as anything other than service, as anything other than a function, as anything other than the person who brought the food and poured the drinks and disappeared back into the kitchen when no longer needed. Until Table 9 reminded her. Manager Choi intercepted Lisa near the service station, her expression tight with a particular anxiety reserved for very wealthy, very difficult clients, the kind whose complaints could cost her job, whose satisfaction was the difference between a good quarter and a bad one. Table 9, she said, smoothing her already immaculate blazer with both hands, a nervous gesture Lisa had learned to recognize as a sign of serious concern. Personal attention. Noetus. These are important guests. Understood, Lisa replied, though her feet were screaming, though the blister on her left heel had probably burst an hour ago, though she wanted nothing more than to sit down for 5 minutes. I mean it, Amadi. These aren't tourists on a company dinner. This is serious money. The kind of money that keeps this restaurant operating. The kind of money we cannot afford to disappoint. Manager Choi's eyes flicked toward the entrance where a man in a charcoal Tom Ford suit was handing his coat to the attendant with the casual disregard of someone who'd never had to hang up his own coat in his life. The 2 men with him looked equally expensive, equally comfortable in their wealth. Ji-hoon appeared at Lisa's side, his 19-year-old face flushed with the kind of proximity to wealth that young people found exciting. That's Park Min-jun, he whispered, practically vibrating with excitement, his eyes wide. His company Nexus Tech just IPO'd. He's worth like 40 billion won, maybe more. Forbes Korea featured him on the cover last month. They called him the next Steve Jobs. Fantastic, Lisa murmured, reaching for the leather-bound menus with gold-embossed lettering. Sujin, the bartender whose Busan accent got thicker when she was stressed or sympathetic, caught her wrist as she passed the bar. Good luck, she said, her eyes conveying something her words couldn't. That one sent back for bottles last time he was here. Said our 2015 Burgundy tasted like nouveau riche desperation. His exact words made Tae-sung cry in the back hallway. Lisa watched Min-jun settle into his seat with the easy confidence of someone who'd never had to ask twice for anything, someone for whom the world rearranged itself automatically. He didn't acknowledge the staff who pulled out chairs or poured water into crystal glasses. He sat first, leaving his colleagues to arrange themselves around his comfort, establishing hierarchy before a word was spoken. The sommelier, a man named Tae-sung who had 2 decades of experience, approached with a wine list. Good evening, Mr. Park. Perhaps I could suggest— No. Min-jun didn't look up from his phone, where he was scrolling through something with intense focus. Tae-sung's professional smile froze on his face. I'll have the 2009 Chateau Margaux. And don't bring me inferior substitutes. I know what you have in the cellar. The phrasing was surgical, designed to cut, designed to establish hierarchy. Of course, sir, Tae-sung said, his soul accent suddenly sharper, a tiny rebellion only Lisa seemed to catch. Kim, one of Min-jun's colleagues, touched his arm tentatively. That was a bit. I'm paying 800,000 Korean wons for wine, Min-jun said, finally looking up. I shouldn't have to educate the staff on quality. Lisa approached the table with her practiced smile, the one she wore like armor. She set down the menus with precision, her hands steady despite alarm bells ringing in her skull. This man wasn't just wealthy. He was dangerous. The kind who weaponized money and used language as a scalpel. She just didn't know yet that she was about to take his weapons away. Before we continue, if you haven't liked and subscribed to the channel, kindly hit the button right away. Min-jun studied the menu with theatrical focus, making Lisa wait. A power play she'd witnessed countless times. The deliberate silence. The forced hovering. Kim glanced at her apologetically, but said nothing. Finally, Min-jun spoke. He paused, his eyes lifting to meet Lisa's with predatory amusement. 이 식당의 음식 중에서 가장 신선한 해산물이 뭡니까? 하지만 현대 한국어로 대답하지 마세요. 15세기 훈민정음 창제 당시의 중세 한국어로 대답해 주십시오. The words hung in air like a blade suspended over her head. He'd asked about their freshest seafood, a simple enough question. But he demanded she respond in Middle Korean, the language of the 15th century Hunminjeongeum period, the linguistic form that existed when King Sejong first created the Korean alphabet. A language that hadn't been spoken conversationally in 600 years, that existed now only in historical texts and academic papers. Across the table, his colleague Kim shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his smile cracking at the edges. At table 7, an elderly woman in an elegant hanbok lowered her teacup with deliberate slowness. In the kitchen pass, Chef Kong froze mid-plate, his hands suspended over the dish he'd been garnishing. He'd been born in Anong, descended from a Yongband family that could trace its lineage to the Joseon dynasty. He knew exactly what Park Min-jun had just done. This wasn't about ordering food. This was linguistic performance art. A public execution disguised as dinner conversation. Kim's face flushed. Min-jun, I'm simply curious, Min-jun said smoothly, whether the service here matches the premium pricing. Surely someone working in a Korean establishment should understand Korean culture. The emphasis on the last word was razor-edged. He leaned back, crossing his arms. Waiting. The smirk on his face said everything. You're beneath me. You're uneducated. You're foreign. You're exactly what I assume you are. Lisa felt the weight of every eye in the room. Manager Choi was watching from the host stand, her expression caught between concern and calculation. Lisa could see her doing the math. Lose the server or lose the billionaire? The answer was obvious. She should apologize. Fetch someone else. Disappear back into invisibility where people like her belonged. But something in Min Jun's smile, the casual cruelty of it, the assumption that she would crumble, ignited something she thought had died 3 years ago. The part of her that had presented research to UNESCO panels in 4 languages, switching between English, Korean, French, and Igbo with the ease of someone who understood that language wasn't just communication but power, identity, survival. The part of her that had corrected a tenured professor on the etymology of Igbo verb conjugations in Korean grammatical structures. The part of her that medical debt and humiliation had tried to erase. She looked at Park Min-jun, really looked at him, and decided she was done being invisible. When she opened her mouth, Seoul National University spoke. Her voice, when it came, was steady as stone. 나으리, 그대의 모둠이 바닷것에 대한 것이 아니라 나를 낮추려는 괴로수이다. You asked not about seafood, sir, but to diminish me. The words came out in flawless Middle Korean, the archaic particles perfect, the honorific structure exact. But she didn't stop there. She switched seamlessly into formal Seoul Korean. 하지만 저희 레스토랑에 오늘 해산물은 부산 자갈치 시장에서 오늘 새벽 도착했습니다. 그런데 선생님의 발음을 정정하겠습니다. 호민정음 시대의 중세 한국어를 쓰시려면 못다 대신 무도라는 동사 형태를 쓰셔야 합니다. 또한 선생님께서 쓰신 높임법이 그 시대의 정확한 문법 구조와 맞지 않습니다. Our seafood arrived from Jagalki Market this morning. But allow me to correct your pronunciation. In true Middle Korean, you should have used the verb form mutso instead of mutta. Additionally, your honorific structure doesn't match the accurate grammatical patterns of that era. Min Jun's face drained of color. Kim's hand flew to his mouth, suppressing laughter. At table 7, the elderly woman's eyes sharpened with interest. Lisa continued, her voice like silk wrapped around steel. 제가 서울대학교에서 4년 동안 한국어와 아프리카 언어의 음물론적 연결을 연구했습니다. 특히 요르바어와 이그보의 성주체계가 한국어의 음문 발전과 어떤 유사점을 가지고 있는지 분석했습니다. 제 논문이 유네스코 언어보존 심포지엄에서 발표되었고 김동희 교수님께서 혁명적이라고 평가해 주셨습니다. 선생님은요? I studied the phonological connections between Korean and African languages at Seoul National University for 4 years. Specifically, I analyzed how the tonal systems of Yoruba and Igbo languages share similarities with Korean phonetic evolution. My dissertation was presented at the UNESCO Linguistic Preservation Symposium, where Professor Kim called it revolutionary. And you, sir? The silence was absolute. Chef Kong emerged from the kitchen, arms crossed, a fierce smile on his face. Manager Choi stood frozen between horror and awe. Lisa set down her notepad with perfect composure. 제가 잠시 시간을 드릴까요? 아니면 선생님이 편하신 어떤 언어로든 제가 주문을 도와드릴까요? Shall I give you a moment to decide, sir? Or would you prefer I order for you in whichever language makes you most comfortable? The rest of service passed in excruciating tension. Min Jun ordered in clipped modern Korean, his voice stripped of showmanship. He barely touched his galbi. Kim ate in silence, occasionally glancing at Lisa with something like respect. When Lisa brought the dessert menus, Min Jun waved them away. Just the bill. She processed the payment at the server terminal, her hands trembling now that adrenaline was fading. She'd done it. She'd spoken. And she was probably about to be fired for humiliating a client worth 40 billion won. When she returned to table 9 with a leather payment folder, Min Jun snatched it from her hands without looking up. He pulled out his black card, signed a receipt with an aggressive slash, and stood abruptly. Kim rose more slowly. Lin Min-yoon froze. His hand went to his jacket pocket, then his other pocket. His face shifted from confusion to something darker. My card, he said loudly. too loudly. Where's my card? Lisa blinked. Sir, you just... I put in the folder. It's gone. His voice rose, cutting through the ambient noise. Conversation stopped. Heads turned. Someone took my card. Manager Choi materialized instantly. Mr. Park, I'm certain there's been a... She was the last person to touch it. Min Jun pointed at Lisa, his fingers shaking not with fear, but with rage. Check her apron. Check her pockets. I want security called. Now, if you're already hating Min Jun's guts and false accusations, feel free to yell at him in the comment box below. Do not forget to tell me where you're watching from so I can send a shout out to a lucky viewer. Please do not forget to subscribe. Lisa's blood turned to ice. Sir, I didn't. You humiliated me. Min Jun hissed, stepping closer. Did you think I just let that go? You think because you memorized some dead language you're better than me? You're a thief. Check her, Manager Choi. Or I'll make sure you're both unemployed too. Ji-hoon looked horrified. Chef Kong pushed through the kitchen doors, fury radiating from him. Soo-jin gripped the bar edge, her knuckles white. Manager Choi's face was ashen. Ms. Amati, if you would just... To clear this up, Lisa felt the world tilting. Her mother's face flashed in her mind. The envelope labeled Mama's Fund. Everything about to disappear because she dared to be visible. Then a voice, calm and cold as winter, cut through the chaos. That won't be necessary. Every head in the dining room turned toward table 7. Lee Sang-woo rose from his seat with the unhurried grace of a man who'd never needed to rush for anything in his 73 years. He was tall, silver-haired, impeccably dressed in a navy suit. His voice carried the faint trace of old soul aristocracy. He walked toward table 9, and the room seemed to rearrange itself around him. Other diners leaned back instinctively, creating space. Min Jun's expression flickered between confusion and irritation. I'm sorry, but this is a private. Mr. Park. Lee Sang-woo's voice was quiet but carried absolute authority. I believe you're causing a scene over a credit card you claim was stolen. It was stolen, Min Jun snapped. By her. He jabbed his finger toward Lisa again. Lee Sang-woo's eyes, dark and sharp, moved to Lisa for a brief moment. Something passed across his face, recognition, but he turned back to Min Jun without comment. I see, and you're quite certain it was taken? I put in the payment folder. She took it to process the bill. When it came back, the card was gone. The logic isn't complicated. L'issonwo noded slowly. Indeed, logic rarely is. Tell me, Mr. Park, have you checked your own pockets? Of course I. Humor me. Check again. Thoroughly. There was something in Lee Sang-woo's tone that wasn't a request. Kim took a small step away from Min Jun. Min Jun made a show of patting his suit pockets. I already. His hand stopped. His face changed. Slowly, he reached into his inner breast pocket and pulled out a black card. The room exhaled collectively. Min Jun stared at the card as though it had materialized from another dimension. It must have fallen from the payment folder into your pocket during the confusion. Lee Sang-woo's eyebrow arched. How remarkably convenient. Almost as convenient as publicly accusing an employee of theft immediately after she had the audacity to speak to you as an intellectual equal. Kim's hand moved to his mouth. Min Jun's face flushed crimson. Now wait just. No. The single word from Lee Sang-woo landed like a gavel. You will not wait. You will apologize to this woman, and then you will leave my establishment. Permanently. Min Jun's eyes widened. Your establishment? My name is on the building, Mr. Park. Surely even you noticed. The color drained from Min Jun's face as understanding dawned. Lee Sung-woo. Azure Sky. Not just a restaurateur, but the chairman of Daehan Financial Holdings, one of the oldest and most powerful private investment firms in Korea. Mr. Lee, I apologize. I didn't realize. Min Jun's voice had lost all its earlier venom. Now it was pure calculation. You didn't realize I was watching when you attempted to humiliate my employee using linguistic theater? Lee Sang-woo's tone remained conversational. Or you didn't realize I was present when you fabricated a theft allegation to retaliate against her. I'm curious which ignorance you're claiming. Kim quietly stepped away from the table. I'll call my own car, he said, and walked toward the exit without looking back. Min Jun reached for him. Kim, wait, but he was already gone. Lee Sang-woo continued. I'm also curious about Nexus Tech's debt obligations. 25 billion Korean wons in quarterly repayments to the Daehan Consortium, if memory serves, due on the 20th of each month. Min Jun went very still. Those are standard terms. Indeed, standard terms that can be called in full with 90 days notice pursuant to Section 12, Paragraph 4 of your loan agreement. The clause regarding moral turpitude and reputational risk to the lending institution. Lee Sang-woo adjusted his cufflinks. I wonder if falsely accusing someone of theft in a public establishment, my establishment, might qualify. You can't. I assure you I can. But I'm not without mercy, Mr. Park. I'll give you a choice. You can apologize to Ms. Ahmadi with sincerity, leave quietly, and we'll consider this an unfortunate lapse in judgment. Or you can continue protesting, and I'll make a phone call that will freeze your credit lines by Monday morning. Manager Choi looked like she might faint. Ji-hoon's mouth hung open. Chef Kong stood with his arms crossed, nodding slowly. Min-yoon looked at Lisa. Something ugly moved behind his eyes. Humiliation, rage, the cornered animal awareness that he'd lost completely. I apologize, he forced out. The words came like broken glass. Lee Sang-woo's expression didn't change. To her, not to me. Min Jun's hands clenched into fists, but when he looked at Lisa, his voice was barely a whisper. I am sorry. Lisa said nothing. She simply watched as he gathered what remained of his dignity and walked toward the exit, his shoulders tight with barely contained fury. The dining room remained silent until the door closed behind him. Then Lee Sang-woo turned to Lisa, and his expression softened completely. Ms. Ahmadi, would you join me in the office? I believe we have much to discuss. Manager Choi's office was small but elegant, lined with awards and photographs of celebrities who dined at Azure Sky. Lisa sat in a leather chair, her heart still hammering, while Lee Sang-woo settled across from her with the ease of someone accustomed to command. 3 years ago, he began without preamble, I attended a symposium at Seoul National University. Language as Identity, Phonological Bridges Between Tonal African Languages and Korean. You were one of 4 presenters. Lisa's breath caught. Your research was extraordinary. You argued that the tonal structures in Yoruba and Igbo weren't just similar to Korean phonetic patterns. They suggested possible historical linguistic exchange routes we'd never considered. Trade routes, perhaps. Migration patterns. You proposed that language wasn't just communication, but a map of human migration and cultural survival. He smiled slightly. I was so impressed that I asked Professor Kim Dong-hee for your contact information. I wanted to offer you a research position at my foundation. But you'd withdrawn. My mother, Lisa whispered. I know. Professor Kim told me about your mother's accident, and I've been trying to locate you ever since. You left no forwarding address. Your university email was deactivated. You vanished. He leaned forward. Until tonight, when I heard you correct a billionaire's grammar in a language most people think belongs in museums. Lisa couldn't speak. I'm establishing the Lee Foundation for Linguistic Preservation. Its mission is to document and protect endangered languages, with particular focus on African-Asian connections. I need a director, someone who understands that language isn't just words. It's power, identity, survival. He paused. The position offers 180 million Korean wons annually, plus full benefits. Your mother would receive care at Asa Medical Center through our partnership program, the finest rehabilitation facility in Korea. 24-hour specialized nursing, whatever she needs, and will cover all transition costs to bring her to Seoul. The words hit her like a physical force. Lisa's vision blurred. The envelope labeled Mama's Fund. The Gazawan room. The shoes held together with superglue and hope. Her mother alone in a facility in Lagos that smelled like disinfectant and abandonment. Why? She managed. Because 3 years ago you presented research that could change how we understand human connection across continents. Because tonight you refuse to be erased. Because the world needs people who remember that words matter, that they can liberate or destroy, elevate or humiliate. Lee Sang-woo's eyes held hers. And because your mother deserves to hear her daughter's voice speaking truth, not reciting specials to people who can't see her brilliance. Lisa's hand shook. For the first time in 3 years, she allowed herself to cry. When would I start? Lee Sang-woo smiled. Tomorrow, if you're willing. But tonight, go home. Rest. Tomorrow, we change your life. 7 months later, Lisa stood in the doorway of room 804 at Asen Medical Center, watching afternoon light stream through floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Han River. The room looked nothing like a hospital. It looked like a home. Grace Amati sat in a cushioned recliner by the window, her legs covered with a soft blanket, her posture stronger than it had been in 3 years. Her physical therapist, Min Seo, was packing equipment, smiling at something Grace had just said, because Grace was moving now. Real movement. Assisted steps. Full sentences without pain medication clouding her words. Lisa crossed the room, her heels clicking on polished floors. Real heels this time, Italian leather that fit perfectly. She wore a navy blazer and carried a leather portfolio embossed with the Lee Foundation seal. Her hair was styled in elegant box braids that framed her face. "Hey, Mama." Grace looked up, and her eyes, clear now, focused, filled with tears. Lisa Chioma Amati. She reached for Lisa's hand, squeezing hard. "My daughter." Lisa knelt beside her chair, pressing her forehead to her mother's. They held each other closely. Lisa's eye gradually became glossy with tears. "I'm here, Mama," she sobbed, hugging her mother tighter, yet careful enough not to hurt her recovering spine. They broke off from each other. Grace stared at her with a proud mother kind of smile. "I always knew you'd make me proud. I always knew you would put a smile on my face since the day your father died, and I'm super proud you never failed," Grace said. Lisa nodded, wiping tears off her eyes. "I wouldn't have been where I am today if I didn't have you as my support system. You taught me all I knew, and today, it's time to appreciate you for being the best mother on the planet." Grace smiled with fulfillment. "Now come on, let me take you home. It's time for you to enjoy the fruit of your labor." Lisa stretched her arm to meet her mother's. The both smiled, and Grace was wheeled off into a new life. Remember the popular saying that pride goes before a fall? We should learn to be compassionate regardless of race and color. If you enjoyed this story, kindly show your support by hitting the subscribe button, like, and share to your friends. Bye.